Hello, this lecture is going to cover evaluation arguments and it will prepare you to write your evaluation essay. I want you to think for just a moment about the last time that you relied on a review by someone else to make a decision. What form did that evaluation take? Maybe it was a customer review of an item of clothing you were about to buy online, perhaps like something on Amazon. Maybe it was a recommendation from a friend about a new series to binge watch. Maybe it was a recommendation for a restaurant in an unfamiliar area. I want you to think about that review or that recommendation. What information were you looking for to help you make your decision? Maybe if you were looking for a particular restaurant to go to, you were thinking about things like value, food quality, customer service, right? And so as you guys are thinking about that, I want you to realize that you are making evaluations all the time, probably every single day. And so because of that, you already know what an evaluation is. And so today, what I'm going to teach you is how to turn that into an academic argument. So, what is an evaluation? Our textbook tells us that it's an assessment about how things measure up. You're making a claim about the quality of something. And so, usually, evaluations are done on a positive or negative scale. Ultimately, we're asking how good or bad is this thing, this item, this restaurant, this piece of clothing, right? Those are kind of like everyday examples that we perhaps may evaluate. So here are some examples for you in different categories. Okay. So in an academic setting, evaluation is used when an instructor grades your writing or any assignment. The grade that you receive is an evaluation. It's an evaluation of your work. How good or poor was it? Right? You may also do evaluations in an academic setting, like using Rate My Professor. You are using the recommendations and doing your research on certain instructors at an institution to determine which is the best one for you to take. In a professional setting, you get evaluated on your performance, right? Typically, this is done by your boss or someone like that, a manager, right? And they see how well or how poorly you are doing your job. Okay. When you are hired for a job, the people who are on hiring committees, they are evaluating their job candidates. So when you send in an application, you're getting evaluated and even compared to other candidates who have applied. And as we've mentioned, there are several personal evaluation examples like choosing a restaurant, maybe even going to buy a used car or buying an item online. So, in order to make an evaluation and to determine if something is positive or negative or good or bad, we base our evaluation on something called criteria. And so this can be something like moral standards, right? What is right, what is wrong, aesthetic standards. And so think about, like when you're talking about a movie, right? And whether a movie was good or bad, right? What are the aesthetic standards that made it good or bad? And then tests of standard functioning as well. Okay, so how are things supposed to work or supposed to go? We can test those things, and those are our criteria. So when we're choosing our criteria in order to make a judgment on a particular subject or topic, we want to identify the criteria by which your subject is normally judged, right? So if you're going to In and Out, right? Maybe you are not necessarily going to use the criteria of the chef's expertise, right? Because it's a fast food restaurant. That's not what we would normally judge in and out on, right? Or if you were to go to, let's say for a moment, a Michelin star restaurant, right? I've never been to a Michelin star restaurant in my life. Maybe you have, I don't know. You're not going to use the criteria of like portion sizes, right? Because it's more at a Michelin star restaurant, from what I understand, it's more about the quality of food rather than the quantity of food, right? So when we are identifying criteria, we can do a couple of different things. We can cite authoritative sources. So what are experts or authorities who know this topic or this subject well? How are they evaluating this topic or subject? And then we also have to think about aligning with the values of the audience. So I'll talk a little bit about the audience later, but you want to remember that you are providing really a recommendation and to your audience, and so you want to make sure that you're aligning with your audience values. And so when we pick our criteria, part of what we do in an evaluation is we convince the audience that the criteria is valid. They have to trust us, right? We have to use our ethos in order to get them to trust us that this criteria that we're making this judgment on is valid. Okay. And so therefore they can trust our recommendation. Now, when you guys are choosing your topics, you are going to probably come across multiple valid criteria. That's going to happen a lot. Even if we look at something like fast food, right? That's probably the easiest to judge. Like, what's the best fast food restaurant? Right? There are going to be multiple valid criteria to base your judgment on, such as, food quality, right? Often that is important to people, even if it is fast food. Customer service, right? Meaning even like how quickly you get your food, right? Um, portion sizes, right? Value. How much is it going to cost? And so when you have multiple valid criteria, what you'll need to do as the author is rank those criteria in order and then justify it to your audience. Like, what is the most important criteria? Because that's how really you're going to prove that your recommendation is trustworthy and valid in itself. So we've talked about a couple of different types of criteria. First of all, we have aesthetic, right? The way something looks, essentially. So if we're thinking about like judging a movie, right? Maybe we would judge it based on like character, um, setting, or the set, costuming, makeup, right? Those are like aesthetic standards. We also have operational criteria where we can get concrete results. How is something supposed to operate? Right? How is it supposed to function? And then finally, there's moral criteria, looking at the right or the wrong. And a lot of times this is shared values within like a community or a culture, right? Most people can agree on what is right or wrong. And sometimes we have to justify those moral standards. Okay, so here are some examples of criteria. So let's say that you go on Rate My Professor and you are trying to find the right professor for your English C1001 class, right? So here are some criteria that you could use to make a judgment on an instructor: their teaching clarity, the workload expectations, student support. What kind of support do they give to students? Are they understanding? Their course organization, and even their reputation among maybe faculty and students. Okay. So those are a lot of valid criteria. And so what you would have to do there is you would have to rank them. Like, what is the most valid or the most important that this professor maybe meets? Okay, let's say that you're on a hiring committee, right? And or maybe even you are a job candidate and you are going to be judged or evaluated on your experience, your communication skills, and how your values align with the company. Right. And so when multiple people are interviewed, they have to rank their criteria like, what of these is the most important to us and who meets that criteria the most or the strongest. Okay. Let's say you go out to buy a used car, right? You may be making an evaluation on that car based on its mileage, right? Maybe you're more likely to buy a car that has less miles because you want to drive it for a long time, right? You also want to look at the maintenance history. Like, did the previous owner, did they take care of their car, or am I going to have to pay all of these costs because um, that person didn't go and get their oil changed or take it to the dealership or whatever when recalls happened. You also might look at price, like what's the value of it based on the mileage and maybe it's condition, right? Maybe it's aesthetic standards, like does it have scratches on it, does it have like dents in it, what is the paint chipped, like all of those things. So price, right? How much is it really worth to you? And then even safety, right? What are its safety standards? Maybe what safety tests has it met? Will you feel safe in the car, right? And so again, lots of valid criteria here, but what is the most important to you, right? You're going to have to rank that when you go and you step onto the CarMax lot or, whatever it is. Okay. So once you've picked your object or your subject of evaluation, and you've kind of determined how that subject or that topic is normally judged, you've done your research, right? Maybe you've looked at authoritative sources, experts, whatever that might be, you can make a judgment, right? You want your judgment to be fair and balanced. So, a judgment is your stance on how the subject does or does not meet the criteria. What do you think? What is your recommendation based on the evidence? And so it's very important that you are providing evidence to support your judgment, right? None of this fast thinking, right? We have to do the slow thinking here, where we are really considering all perspectives, all sides, and all the different criteria, right? And that evidence has to show how the subject does or does not meet the determined criteria. Okay, so here are a couple of examples for you. You could potentially think of these as thesis statements, right? So the 2026 adaptation of Wuthering Heights was disappointing because of its narrative and its character choices, right? So that those are my criteria: narrative, character choices. So I would have to find evidence to prove that both of those things were disappointing. Okay. Here's another example. Person A is a strong candidate, right? That's a positive evaluation for the job because they have relevant workplace experience, demonstrated clear communication in the interview process, and expressed values aligned with the company, right? Those are our three criteria. And so now I have to prove and show that because they meet that criteria, that makes them a strong candidate. So when you guys are choosing your topics, you pick your criteria, you make a judgment, right? Then you'll formulate this kind of thesis statement that states your criteria. Okay. Now, sometimes in some instances, it might be appropriate to make a comparative evaluation, right? So you're going to look at the worth of one subject in relation to another. right? And you evaluate each subject according to the same criteria. So here's a really short example. Obviously, there's probably going to be more criteria than this when we're evaluating a burger joint, but this is a simple one. This is one that I get in arguments with my family members who live in Texas all the time because they have In-N-Out and they have Whataburger, right? So let's just say that we're going to compare food quality and value, right? For In-N-Out, it has a limited menu, and so that means it has tighter quality control, whereas Whataburger has larger variation across locations. Potentially, we could argue that it has kind of a looser quality control. Right? Now, we could take that, like the variation, we could make that even its own, like, sub criteria or subcategory of food quality, right? And so that might be something that you do in your evaluations as well. Um, and then value, right? In-N-Out is typically known for having low national prices, whereas Whataburger is known to be a little bit more expensive, not too much, but with their combos, they tend to be more expensive, right? So I would have to go out and find the evidence, find the research to support this. And I could make this comparative evaluation that like In-N-Out is better than Whataburger because of the food quality and the value. Okay. So, as you guys are formulating and brainstorming for your evaluation essay, you want to remember that you're writing for an audience. You are conveying your impressions to an audience, so you need to keep their expectations in mind. Think about them as people who are actually interested and want to learn more. And you may even consider like who is most likely to read this evaluation? Who is my target audience? Who am I writing this for? And what are their values and beliefs? And one really important thing when you're writing an evaluation is you want to tell them what they don't already know, right? Because that might sway them to believe you or trust you more. Okay, so as you guys go out and you start to pick your topics and do some research on your evaluation essay, please keep, the idea of criteria and judgment in mind. Best of luck to you.